please tell me about your airplane and why we find ourselves with a tail wheel instead of a skid.
Well, primarily because when we land at Le Bourget and we put a big furrow down their runway, they're not going to like it.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense to me.
But so we'll be landing at international airports around the world when we're on wheels, and of course you need a wheel. What they had originally was a big tail skid with bungee cords up in here, and this is a tail wheel off a Beech 18, which was a World War II era plane, and this is just a metal prop. We have the bungee, not the bungee, but the shock absorber that we built to take place of the bungee back here. So it'll be a steerable tail wheel.
So you were saying that it won't always be on wheels, that it'll be on something else?
Yes, it goes on floats. So it left Seattle on floats, and up the Aleutians around to Japan, down the East China Sea, and eventually around to Calcutta. And then they changed the wheels across India. So. And then when they got back up to England, floats around across the North Atlantic and down to Boston.
So this will be an airplane that'll operate on the land and on the water as well.
Yep.
Sounds like a pretty incredible journey. It was 175 days for the crew. Did they accomplish that in 175 consecutive days?
Yes, it was about 6 months. So they left in April, early April 6th, and they got back September 28th. So about 6 months. And they kept flying. I mean, it was they did maintenance, they did a little resting. Their resting was all part of celebrations. So each country they went to, they went to dinners and things like that. But as soon as they got the maintenance done on the airplane, they were gone.
Now, as I understand it, it started out with 4 airplanes, is that correct?
Right. They had 4 airplanes that left Seattle. The command ship was the Seattle. Then they had the Chicago, the Boston, and the New Orleans. And Seattle crashed in Alaska. And the other, they eventually hiked out and rescued themselves. And the other 3 flew on. They lost the Boston and North Atlantic. They were rescued as well, and they were given the training plane, which was called the Boston II, and they continued the trip back to Seattle.
So I've been up to Washington, D.C. at the Air and Space Museum and saw that the Chicago was there in their gallery, and I understand that the Los Angeles County Historical Museum has the New Orleans, the number 4. Right. What is it that got you involved with this project?
I probably wasn't thinking very clearly. I don't know. I think Diane and I have done a lot of, you might call long distance flying. First in a J3. We bought one and flew from Seattle to Lock Haven, Pennsylvania in '86. And then we did that 13 times, back and forth cross country. And then we shipped it to England and flew to Egypt with it. We were trying to get to Australia, but Egypt is as far as we got. And then we bought a Super Cub and flew to England to save money from shipping, of course. And then we flew to Australia, and then so we just kept going. So we got to Japan with that. So, I don't know. The flight around the world just seemed like a natural thing to do, I guess. I like the history, of course. That really plays a big part in my fascination with it. And the first flight around the world, I mean, you know, it's not only do you get to fly around the world, but you've got, you know, this great historical context.
Right, and that history is great for Pearson as well, because I understand in October of 1924, the Douglas World Cruiser visited Pearson Airfield and then returned to Los Angeles with the accomplished team. I understand you're considering possibly visiting Pearson Air Museum as well.
Oh, no, after talking to you, absolutely. They stopped on the way to Seattle before the flight started. They stopped on the return trip to Seattle. And then, as you mentioned, they stopped at Pearson going back to Southern California. So, as far as I remember, you know, they actually were there 3 times. So Pearson is a very historic field. The Russians stopped there on their first polar flight. I can't think of who was the commander of the base at one time, but he was a World War II general. It wasn't Hap Arnold. I can't think of who it was at the moment.
Maybe it was George C. Marshall?
Marshall. It was Marshall. So it's been actually a stopping point for a lot of people over the generations. And it's a very historic field, and I'm tickled pink that it's still open and being maintained. And the collection is building every year. So it's a very notable field. We're going to be tickled pink to stop there and continue the celebration.
And we're looking very forward to have you there.